Ambassador Zexai had conquered 17 star systems, negotiated peace between species that had been at war for millennia, and once talked down a living planet from consuming its own moon. But nothing in her 3 centuries of diplomatic service had prepared her for the horror of her latest assignment, Earth. The humans were supposed to be simple, primitive, a backward species that had barely crawled out of their gravity well and were already fighting wars in space. The Galactic Council had assured her this would be a quick posting, establish basic trade agreements, set up monitoring stations, and keep these violent apes from accidentally starting an interstellar incident. She expected barbarians wielding crude weapons and speaking in grunts. She found something far more terrifying, a species that shouldn't exist, doing things that were impossible, and somehow making it all look effortless. This is the story of how the galaxy's most decorated diplomat learned to stop underestimating humanity, and why that lesson would save both their species from a threat neither saw coming. Ambassador Zexai's crystalline features hardened as she stared at the holographic display floating above her desk. The blue-green marble of Earth rotated slowly, its single moon casting shadows across continents she already despised without having visited. The assignment orders glowed in harsh red text beside it, each word feeling like a personal insult. Earth assignment. Duration, indefinite. Priority, minimal. Objective, basic diplomatic contact. She had spent the last 2 standard years negotiating the Altarian Accords, preventing 3 different species from glassing each other's homeworlds over a trade dispute about exotic matter. Before that, she had successfully mediated the first peaceful contact between the hive minds Etherians and the individualistic Corvan Republic. Her diplomatic achievements had earned her the stellar crown of excellence 3 times running. And now they wanted her to babysit a bunch of barely spacefaring primitives. The door to her office chimed, and High Counselor Veltar's massive form filled the doorway. The 8-foot-tall reptilian scales gleamed under the artificial lighting, and his 4 eyes focused on her with what she recognized as barely contained amusement. "I see you've reviewed your new assignment," he rumbled, his voice carrying the harmonic undertones that marked his species' emotional state. He was definitely enjoying this. High Counselor, Zexai stood and offered the proper salute, though her movements carried more stiffness than respect. "I must respectfully request clarification. Surely there's been some error in the assignment protocols." Veltar's throat sac inflated slightly, the Corvan equivalent of a chuckle. "No error, Ambassador. The Council has decided that your particular talents are exactly what this situation requires." "My talents?" Zexai's voice rose an octave. "Counselor, my expertise lies in complex multi-species negotiations, preventing interstellar wars, and managing delicate political situations involving mature civilizations. These humans haven't even achieved faster-than-light travel on their own. They're barely past the Stone Age in galactic terms." Stone Age. Veltar moved to the viewport, gazing out at the stars beyond the Council station. "Tell me, Ambassador, what do you know about human history?" Zexai accessed her neural implant, pulling up the basic files. Homo sapiens, 3rd planet of the Sol system. Carbon-based bipeds, average lifespan 80 standard years. They achieved nuclear fission approximately 100 local years ago, spaceflight 60 years ago, and established their first permanent orbital installations 30 years ago. They're currently engaged in 3 separate armed conflicts on their home world and have a tendency toward tribal behavior. Anything else? They appear to be remarkably violent for their development level. The preliminary reports suggest they've been in a state of almost constant warfare throughout their recorded history. Standard xenopsychology profiles suggest a highly aggressive species with poor impulse control and limited capacity for long-term planning. Veltar's throat sac inflated again, this time accompanied by what sounded almost like wheezing. "Oh, Ambassador, you're going to find this assignment far more educational than you anticipate." "Counselor, I don't understand. If these humans are so primitive, why not send a junior attaché?" Why waste my experience on what should be a routine first contact protocol? Because Veltar turned to face her, and for the first time she could remember, his expression was completely serious. The humans have done something that has the entire council's xenobiology department in an uproar. Something that shouldn't be possible. Despite her frustration, Zexhai felt a flicker of curiosity. In 3 centuries of diplomatic service, she had encountered species that could manipulate gravity with their thoughts, beings made of pure energy, and civilizations that existed in 11 dimensions simultaneously. Very little qualified as impossible anymore. What have they done? They've survived. Zexhai stared at him. Counselor, survival is hardly remarkable. Every species in the council has survived long enough to achieve spaceflight. Have they? Veltar activated his own holographic display, and suddenly the office was filled with star charts. Let me show you something interesting. This is the galactic map from 50,000 years ago. The display showed thousands of systems, many marked with different colored indicators. Zexhai recognized the coding: blue for peaceful civilizations, red for aggressive ones, green for spacefaring, yellow for pre-space flight. Now, this is the same region today. The map shifted, and Zexhai's breath caught her throat. Fully 60% of the markers had simply vanished. Where there had once been thriving civilizations, now there was only empty space. Where did they go? They destroyed themselves, Ambassador. Every single aggressive species in this galactic arm has either evolved past their violent tendencies within 10,000 years of achieving spaceflight, or they've annihilated themselves. It's actually quite predictable. We call it the aggression filter. Zexhai studied the map more carefully. But humans are aggressive. The reports clearly indicate. The humans should have destroyed themselves decades ago, Veltar interrupted. According to every xenopsychological model we have, they should have triggered a nuclear exchange within 20 years of developing atomic weapons. They came close several times, but somehow they pulled back. Every time, the ambassador felt a chill run through her crystalline structure. That's unusual. It gets better. Do you know what they've been doing during their 30 years of space-based civilization? Zexhai checked her files again. Establishing orbital infrastructure, beginning resource extraction from their moon and nearby asteroids, constructing what appear to be defensive platforms. They've been preparing for us. The statement hung in the air like a physical presence. Zexhai's analytical mind immediately began processing the implications. They know about the Council, not specifically, but somehow they seem to understand that space is populated. They've been scanning constantly, building defensive capabilities, and, most remarkably, they've been trying to unify their entire species under a single governmental structure. Not through conquest, which would be the expected pattern, but through negotiation and cooperation. Zexhai's worldview began to crack slightly around the edges. Species didn't do that. Aggressive species conquered until they triggered a response that destroyed them. Peaceful species evolved slowly and cautiously. Nobody tried to have it both ways. The Council is sending you, Veltar continued, because in the next 6 months, human deep space monitoring will advance to the point where they'll detect our regular shipping routes. When that happens, first contact becomes inevitable. And when we make contact with them, we need someone who can figure out what makes them tick. And if I can't, Veltar's expression became even more serious. Then, we may be looking at the first species to successfully break the aggression filter while retaining their drive for expansion and conflict. Do you understand what that could mean for galactic stability? Zexhai did understand, and it terrified her. Every war in galactic history had been fought either by primitive species destroying themselves or by peaceful species with limited territorial ambitions. A species that could maintain its aggressive drives while also developing the wisdom to avoid self-destruction could potentially threaten every established civilization in the galaxy. How long do I have to prepare? Your transport leaves in 6 hours. The advanced scout ship, Serenity's Edge, will take you to the Outer Sol system, where you'll establish a monitoring post and begin preliminary observations. Once you feel you understand the humans sufficiently, you'll make formal contact. As Veltar turned to leave, Zexhai called after him. Counselor, what if my assessment is that humans represent a threat to galactic peace? He paused at the doorway. Then, Ambassador, you'll recommend that the Council authorize preemptive action before they develop true interstellar capability. We have perhaps 50 local years before their technology reaches that point. After he left, Zexhai stood alone in her office, staring at the holographic Earth. 50 years to decide the fate of an entire species. She had ended wars, but she had never been asked to potentially authorize genocide. She began pulling files, determined to understand everything possible about these strange humans before she had to make such a momentous decision. The preliminary reports painted a picture of contradiction, a species that created beautiful art while simultaneously developing increasingly efficient ways to kill each other. They wrote poetry about peace while building weapons of mass destruction. They showed extraordinary compassion for their own kind while displaying casual cruelty to other species on their planet. The more she read, the more confused she became. Humans didn't fit any of the standard xenopsychological models. They were simultaneously the most violent and most empathetic species she had ever encountered in the files. They could display incredible altruism and shocking selfishness, sometimes within the same individual. By the time she boarded the transport ship, Zexhai had developed a working theory. Humans weren't actually a single species at all, but rather two or more species that had somehow learned to coexist in the same bodies. It was the only explanation that made sense of the contradictory data. The journey to the Sol system took 3 standard weeks, during which Zexhai continued her research and began learning the dominant human languages. Her linguistic implants made the process relatively straightforward, though she found human languages remarkably inefficient compared to the standardized Council trade tongue. As the transport dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Sol system, Zexhai got her first direct view of human space. What she saw made her question everything she thought she knew about primitive civilizations. The system was buzzing with activity. Massive orbital installations surrounded Earth, its moon, and the planet they called Mars. Asteroid mining operations dotted the asteroid belt, connected by a constant stream of cargo vessels. Most remarkably, she could see what were clearly defensive platforms, dozens of them, armed with weapons that her ship's sensors couldn't quite classify, but registered as potentially dangerous. Ambassador, the ship's captain, a 4-armed vegan named Clicks, approached her observation station. We're detecting active sensor sweeps from multiple sources. The humans are definitely watching us. Are we outside their weapons range? Unknown. Their weapons technology doesn't match anything in our databases. The energy signatures are unusual. Zexhai felt her first real surge of unease. A primitive species shouldn't have weapons that can fuse Council sensors. Establish the monitoring station at the coordinates provided. And Captain, maintain maximum stealth protocols. I want to observe these humans for a while before they observe me. As the transport moved deeper into the system, Zexhai watched human civilization at work. She saw massive cargo vessels moving between planets with efficiency that rivaled Council shipping. She observed construction projects on a scale that suggested not just planetary industry, but genuine system-wide infrastructure development. And everywhere she looked, she saw weapons. Not just the obvious military installations, but civilian vessels with obvious defensive capabilities, mining ships that could probably double as warships, and even what appear to be armed merchant vessels. These weren't the actions of a primitive species. They were the preparations of a civilization that expected to fight for its survival. As the monitoring station came online and began its passive observations, Zexhai realized that her simple assignment had just become far more complicated. She wasn't just evaluating whether humans could be trusted with galactic citizenship. She was trying to determine whether they already posed a threat to every other species in the galaxy. The irony wasn't lost on her. She had been sent to assess whether humans were too dangerous to be allowed to develop further. But as she watched their systematic, methodical preparation for whatever threat space might hold, she began to wonder if the real question was whether the galaxy was prepared for humanity. Her preliminary report back to the Council would need to be carefully worded. She had a growing suspicion that underestimating these humans would be a mistake that the galaxy might not survive. 3 weeks into her observation period, HFY was ready to request reassignment to literally anywhere else in the galaxy. The humans weren't just confusing. They were actively defying every principle of xenopsychology she had learned in 3 centuries of diplomatic service. She sat in the cramped monitoring station, surrounded by screens displaying data that made no sense. Captain Clicks had departed 2 days ago, leaving her with an automated station and a small crew of technicians who seemed as baffled by human behavior as she was. Ambassador, her aide, a nervous young Altarian named Kix, approached with another data pad. The behavioral analysis algorithms have completed processing yesterday's intercepts. You're not going to like the results. HFY accepted the pad with a sigh that created harmonics in her crystalline throat. Let me guess. More contradictions. We intercepted approximately 12,000 individual communications yesterday. The content analysis shows that simultaneously, humans were planning charity drives to feed their poor, developing new weapon systems to kill each other, composing love poetry, creating art that celebrates both peace and war, conducting scientific research to cure diseases, and designing more efficient ways to extract natural resources from their planet. All of this is consistent with what we've observed before. Yes, but here's the part that doesn't make sense. The algorithms can't find any pattern to predict which humans will engage in which behaviors. We've been tracking specific individuals, and the same human who spent his morning designing charity protocols spent his afternoon working on military applications of quantum physics. Another human wrote a poem about universal brotherhood, and then immediately began coding what appears to be a cyber warfare virus. HFY studied the data, feeling her confusion deepen. Perhaps they have some form of multiple personality disorder endemic to their species? We considered that, but their brain scans show normal unified consciousness patterns. They're not switching between personalities. They're somehow holding completely contradictory viewpoints simultaneously and acting on both of them. Through the observation deck's viewport, HFY could see Earth hanging in space, its blue oceans and white clouds making it look deceptively peaceful. She had been watching human activities for weeks now, and every day brought new puzzles. She had observed a human military unit that spent 3 hours training for combat, then spent the next 4 hours building shelters for refugees from a natural disaster. She had watched human scientists collaborate on projects to heal genetic disorders, while simultaneously developing biotechnology that could be weaponized. She had seen human children playing games that taught both cooperation and competition, often switching between the 2 modes within the same game. Show me the linguistic analysis, she requested. Kix activated another display. This is where it gets really strange. Human languages contain extensive vocabulary for both war and peace, cruelty and compassion, individual achievement, and group cooperation. But they don't use different languages for different concepts. The same human will use words of love and words of hatred in the same conversation, often to describe the same situation. HFY examined the examples scrolling across the screen. Humans described their military forces as both defenders of peace and instruments of war. They spoke of fighting for love and warring against hate. Their literature celebrated both individual heroes and collective achievement, often within the same stories. It's as if, she murmured, they've somehow managed to synthesize concepts that should be mutually exclusive. There's more. We've been analyzing their historical records, and the pattern goes back for millennia. They've always been like this. The same civilizations that developed philosophy about universal peace also developed increasingly sophisticated methods of warfare. The same cultures that created codes of honor about protecting the weak also engaged in conquest and slavery. HFY activated the long-range sensors, focusing on human activities throughout the Sol system. What she saw continued to baffle her. Human mining operations were incredibly efficient, but they also showed clear evidence of environmental protection protocols. Their space-based manufacturing was producing both medical equipment and weapons, often in the same facilities. Their defensive installations were positioned to protect not just Earth, but all human settlements throughout the system. Yet those same installations were clearly designed to be capable of offensive operations. Kix, pull up the psychological profiles on other aggressive species that have achieved spaceflight. The young aide's tentacles worked rapidly across the control surfaces. Done. As you can see, the pattern is remarkably consistent. Aggressive species tend to maintain their hostility patterns until they either destroy themselves or encounter a superior force that forces them to change. The few that survive typically undergo a fairly rapid transformation toward pacifism. But humans haven't followed either path. No, if anything, they seem to be becoming more cooperative and more militarily capable at the same time. Their international conflicts have actually decreased in frequency and intensity over the past 50 local years, but their military technology has advanced exponentially. HFY stood and began pacing, a habit she had developed during particularly difficult negotiations. What if we're approaching this wrong? What if humans aren't an aggressive species that needs to choose between violence and peace? What if there's something else entirely? I don't understand. Every species we've cataloged falls into predictable categories. Aggressive species that destroy themselves, peaceful species that advance slowly and carefully, hive minds that operate through consensus, individual-focused species that struggle with cooperation. But what if humans represent a completely new category? Before Kix could respond, alarms began sounding throughout the monitoring station. The main display lit up with proximity warnings, and HFY felt her crystalline structure contract in surprise. Ambassador, we have 3 human vessels approaching our position. They appear to be military in nature. HFY studied the tactical display. The human ships were smaller than the monitoring station, but they were moving in a coordinated formation that spoke of military training. More concerning, her sensors couldn't get clear readings on their capabilities. How do they find us? We're operating under full stealth protocols. Unknown. But Ambassador, they're transmitting. Transmitting what? It appears to be a greeting. In the council, trade tongue. HFY stared at the communications display in shock. Humans weren't supposed to know the council existed, much less speak their languages. Put it through. The communications array crackled to life, and a distinctly human voice spoke in heavily accented but clearly understandable council standard. Unknown vessel. This is Commander Sarah Chun of the Earth Defense Force. You have been operating in our system for 24 days. We respectfully request that you identify yourself and state your intentions. The silence in the monitoring station was deafening. Finally, Kix managed to whisper, "They've been watching us the entire time." HFY's mind raced. This changed everything. If humans had been aware of the Council's presence from the beginning, then every assumption about first contact protocols was invalid. She activated the response system. Commander Chun, I am Ambassador HFY of the Galactic Council. I was not aware that humanity knew of our existence. There was a pause before the response came. Ambassador, we've known someone was out there for quite some time. We weren't sure if you were friendly or not, which is why we've been watching rather than making contact. May I ask how long you've known of our existence? We've been detecting regular traffic through our system for approximately 8 local years. We assumed it was either automated systems or deliberate surveillance. We've been hoping it was the former, but preparing for the latter. HFY looked at Kix, who was frantically checking the stealth systems. According to every sensor, the monitoring station should have been completely invisible to human technology. Yet they had not only detected it, they had been tracking it for weeks. Commander Chun, would you be willing to discuss the possibility of formal diplomatic contact? That's exactly what we've been hoping for, Ambassador. Though I should warn you, we have some questions about your intentions. Questions? You've been conducting what appears to be intelligence gathering for several weeks without making contact. In human culture, that could be interpreted as either caution or hostile reconnaissance. We're hoping it's the former. The directness of the statement caught Zexhai off guard. Most species, when confronted with obviously superior technology, either submitted immediately or became irrationally hostile. Humans are doing neither. They were treating this as a conversation between equals. Commander, I assure you that our intentions are purely diplomatic. I was conducting preliminary observations to better understand human culture before making formal contact. That's what we hoped. Would you be willing to meet in person? We've prepared a facility on our lunar base that can accommodate non-human physiology. Zethai Hestita. Meeting on human territory would put her at a significant disadvantage, but refusing might be interpreted as hostile. More importantly, she was beginning to realize that everything she thought she knew about humans was wrong. Direct observation might be her only chance to understand them. I would be honored to accept your invitation. Excellent. We'll transmit coordinates for our lunar facility. Fair warning, we'll want to discuss a few topics that might be sensitive, such as, well, Ambassador, we've been wondering whether the Galactic Council considers humanity to be a threat. Your observation patterns suggest you're conducting a threat assessment rather than standard diplomatic reconnaissance. Once again, human directness left Zexhai speechless. They had not only detected her presence, they had analyzed her methods well enough to determine her actual mission. Commander, I think this conversation will be better conducted in person. Agreed. We'll see you in 12 hours, Ambassador. And welcome to human space. As the communication ended, Zexhai turned to find Kix staring at her with wide eyes. Ambassador, they knew. They've known about us for years, and they've been preparing for contact. Yes, and that raises some very troubling questions. If humans have known about galactic civilization for years, why haven't they tried to make contact themselves? Maybe they were afraid? Zexhai studied the tactical display, watching the human ships maintain their respectful but clearly defensive formation. Kix, does that look like fear to you? The aide examined the data. No, Ambassador. It looks like patience, like they've been waiting for us to make the first move, which suggests they have a plan for this encounter. As Zexhai prepared for her first face-to-face meeting with humans, she realized that her mission had just become far more complicated. She wasn't just assessing whether humans were ready for galactic contact. She was trying to determine whether the galaxy was ready for humans. And based on what she had observed so far, she was beginning to suspect that the answer to that question was a resounding no. The humans had managed to detect Council surveillance technology, had learned the Council trade language, and had been patiently waiting for contact while preparing for every possible outcome. They weren't the primitive species described in the initial reports. They were something far more dangerous, a species that was both militarily capable and diplomatically sophisticated. As her transport approached the lunar facility, Zexhai found herself wondering if she was about to meet with the galaxy's newest members or its greatest threat. The Luna diplomatic facility was not what Zexhai had expected. As her shuttle approached the human installation, she had anticipated something crude and functional, the kind of basic construction that characterized most pre-Council civilizations. Instead, she found herself looking at a complex that rivaled some of the finest diplomatic facilities in Council space. The structure was built into a crater wall, with sections extending both above and below the lunar surface. The architecture somehow managed to be both aesthetically pleasing and obviously functional, with clean lines that suggested both artistic sensibility and engineering efficiency. More importantly, her sensors detected atmospheric processors, gravity generators, and radiation shielding that shouldn't have existed in human technology. Ambassador, her pilot, a stoic Corvin named Thex, reported from the cockpit. They're transmitting docking instructions in 17 different languages, including several I don't recognize. 17 languages? How many different species do they think we might be? Based on these protocols, they appear to have prepared for contact with a wide variety of potential visitors. Some of these atmospheric combinations would be suitable for species we haven't encountered in Council space for centuries. As the shuttle settled into the docking bay, Zexhai noted that the facility included life support systems for at least a dozen different species types. The humans hadn't just prepared for contact with the Council. They had prepared for contact with anyone. Commander Sarah-chan was waiting for her as she disembarked. The human was smaller than Zexai had expected, standing only about 5.5 feet tall, with dark hair and alert brown eyes. She wore what appeared to be a military uniform, but one that incorporated diplomatic insignia Zexai didn't recognize. Ambassador Zexai, Chen extended her hand in what Zexai recognized as a human gesture of greeting. Welcome to Luna Base. I hope the atmospheric settings are comfortable for your physiology. They are perfect, Commander. Though I must admit, I'm curious how you knew the proper settings for my species. Chun smiled, and Zexai was struck by how the expression seemed genuinely warm rather than diplomatic. We've been studying Council species for several years, ever since we confirmed that our system was under observation. We wanted to be prepared for contact with any member species. As they walked through the facility's corridors, Zexai was amazed by what she saw. The humans had created detailed cultural displays for dozens of Council species, complete with appropriate meeting spaces, dietary requirements, and social protocols. This wasn't the work of a primitive civilization. It was the preparation of a species that understood the complexity of interspecies diplomacy. Commander, may I ask how humanity acquired such detailed knowledge of Council species? Careful observation and analysis. We've been monitoring Council shipping routes for 8 years, and we've intercepted a considerable amount of communication traffic. Our xenolinguistics teams have been working around the clock to understand not just your languages, but your cultures. They enter a meeting room that had clearly been designed with Zexai's species in mind. The lighting was adjusted to frequencies that complemented her crystalline physiology. The temperature was precisely calibrated for her comfort, and the furniture was designed to accommodate her unique anatomy. This is remarkable, Zexai admitted. Most Council species require months of preparation before they can properly accommodate other species' needs. We've had time to prepare, Chen replied, taking a seat across from her. We've been wondering when you would finally make contact. Commander, I must ask, why didn't humanity attempt to make contact first? You clearly have the capability. Chen's expression became more serious. Because we weren't sure of your intentions. When you detect unknown technology in your space, you have 2 basic options. Assume it's friendly and potentially expose yourself to conquest, or assume it's hostile and potentially start a war through misunderstanding. We chose a third option, which was prepare for both possibilities while gathering as much information as possible. We've spent 8 years learning everything we could about the Council while simultaneously developing the capability to defend ourselves if necessary. Zexai felt a chill run through her crystalline structure. Defend yourselves? Against the Council? Against anyone who might pose a threat to humanity. We've learned from our own history, Ambassador. When a more advanced civilization encounters a less advanced one, the results are rarely beneficial for the less advanced species. The directness of the statement was both refreshing and terrifying. Humans were acknowledging their technological disadvantage, while simultaneously indicating they had prepared to fight despite it. Commander, the Council's intentions toward humanity are entirely peaceful. We seek only diplomatic contact and potential trade relationships. We hope that's true, Ambassador. But we've also studied galactic history as best we can reconstruct it from intercepted communications. We know about species that have simply vanished from Council records. We know about civilizations that were forcibly relocated for galactic security. We know about the aggression filter. Zexai's shock must have shown in her bioluminescent patterns, because Chun leaned forward with obvious interest. You're surprised that we know about the filter. How could you possibly? Pattern analysis. When you have incomplete data, you look for patterns that might explain the gaps. We noticed that aggressive species tend to disappear from Council records within a relatively short period after achieving spaceflight. We also noticed that the few aggressive species that remain have all undergone dramatic cultural changes toward pacifism. The humans' analytical capabilities were staggering. They had reverse-engineered one of the Council's most classified xenopolitical concepts from fragmentary communications intercepts. Commander, What conclusions did humanity draw from this analysis? That the Council either helps aggressive species evolve past their violent tendencies, or eliminates them as a threat. We've been hoping for the former while preparing for the latter. Chun activated a holographic display, and Zexai found herself looking at a comprehensive analysis of Council military capabilities, trade routes, and political structures. The detail was astounding and deeply concerning. This intelligence is remarkably accurate, Zexai admitted. We're good at gathering information when our survival depends on it. But, Ambassador, we're not interested in conflict with the Council. We're hoping to find a third path. A third path. Every species you've encountered has either been naturally peaceful or has been forced to choose between pacifism and extinction. But what if there's another option? What if a species could maintain its defensive capabilities while also developing the wisdom to use them responsibly? Zexai studied the human across from her. Chin's words echoed her own growing thoughts about human uniqueness, but from a perspective she hadn't considered. You're suggesting that humans could break the aggression filter without abandoning your capacity for conflict. We're suggesting that maybe the filter is based on a false choice. Maybe the problem isn't aggression itself, but uncontrolled aggression. Maybe a species can retain its ability to fight while learning when not to fight. The concept was both fascinating and terrifying. If humans were right, they could represent an entirely new category of spacefaring species, one that could be trusted with advanced technology while retaining the capability to use it for warfare. Commander, may I ask what evidence humanity has that this approach can work? Chun activated another display, and Zexai saw a comprehensive analysis of human history over the past century. For the last 100 years, humanity has been conducting an experiment in controlled aggression. We've developed increasingly powerful weapons while simultaneously developing increasingly sophisticated methods of conflict resolution. Our wars have become less frequent, but more carefully managed. We've learned to direct our competitive drives toward exploration, science, and achievement rather than territorial conquest. The data was compelling. Human conflicts had indeed decreased in frequency, while their military capabilities had increased exponentially. More importantly, they had begun cooperating on global challenges while maintaining distinct national identities and competitive economies. This is remarkable, Zexai said. But how can the Council be certain that humans won't eventually revert to uncontrolled aggression? You can't be certain, Chen admitted. But you also can't be certain that forced pacifism is sustainable in the long term. What happens to Council species when they encounter a threat that can't be negotiated with or reasoned away? The question hit Zexai like a physical blow. In 3 centuries of diplomatic service, she had never encountered a truly implacable threat. Council space was peaceful precisely because all aggressive species had been either pacified or eliminated. Are you suggesting that the Council is vulnerable to external threats? I'm suggesting that a galaxy full of pacifist species might find itself unprepared if it ever encountered something genuinely hostile. We've been monitoring deep space, Ambassador. There are things out there that don't show any interest in communication or negotiation. Chun activated one final display, and Zexai found herself looking at long-range sensor data from human deep space monitoring stations. The readings showed massive structures moving through empty space at incredible velocities, heading roughly in the direction of Council space. What are those? We don't know. They don't respond to any form of communication, they don't match any known technological signatures, and they're big enough to be mobile planets. Our best estimates suggest they'll reach the outer Council systems in approximately 50 local years. Zexai stared at the data, her mind racing. If these readings were accurate, the Council was facing a potential threat of unprecedented magnitude, and the only species that seemed to be aware of it and preparing for it was humanity. Have you shared this information with the Council? We've been trying to decide whether to do so. On one hand, you deserve to know about potential threats to your space. On the other hand, sharing this information would reveal the full extent of our surveillance capabilities, which would almost certainly result in demands that we dismantle our defensive preparations. And you're not willing to do that. Would you disarm in the face of an unknown threat? The question was rhetorical, but it forced Zexhai to confront an uncomfortable reality. If she were in humanity's position, she would probably make the same choice. Commander, what does humanity want from the Council? Partnership, not membership. We understand that our approach to conflict resolution doesn't fit Council norms. But we'd like to establish trade relationships, share scientific knowledge, and coordinate our response to external threats. And if the Council refuses? Chin's expression became harder. Then, we'll continue preparing to defend ourselves and our allies. But, Ambassador, we really hope it doesn't come to that. We've studied your species' history, your diplomats and peacemakers. We think we could learn a great deal from each other. As their meeting concluded, Zexhai found herself facing the most complex decision of her career. The humans were offering partnership rather than submission, and they had information about threats that could endanger the entire galaxy. They had also demonstrated capabilities that shouldn't exist in a pre-Council species. More importantly, they had forced her to question fundamental assumptions about the nature of aggression and survival. What if the Council had been wrong about the aggression filter? What if forced pacification wasn't the only solution to species-level violence? As she prepared to return to her monitoring station, Commander Chin offered one final thought. Ambassador, humanity has learned something important from our history. The species that survive are rarely the strongest or the most peaceful. They're the ones that can adapt to changing circumstances while remaining true to their essential nature. We think the galaxy might need that kind of adaptability in the years ahead. As Zexhai's shuttle departed the lunar facility, she realized that her mission had completely changed. She was no longer assessing whether humanity was ready for galactic contact. She was trying to determine whether the galaxy was ready for the partnership humanity was offering and whether it could afford to refuse. Zexhai spent 3 sleepless days reviewing every piece of data from her meeting with Commander Chun, and the more she analyzed, the more convinced she became that everything the Council thought it knew about interstellar civilization was wrong. The deep space sensor readings haunted her dreams. Those massive structures moving through empty space toward Council territory represented either the greatest threat the galaxy had ever faced or the most elaborate deception attempt in recorded history. Either possibility terrified her. She was composing her preliminary report to the Council when her communication array lit up with an urgent priority signal from High Counselor Veltar himself. Ambassador, the Corvin's image appeared in holographic form, his throat sac inflated with obvious agitation. We have a problem. Our deep space monitoring stations have detected massive, unknown structures approaching Council space. We need your assessment of human capabilities immediately. Zexhai felt her crystalline structure contract in shock. Counselor, how long have you known about these structures? They were detected 18 hours ago by our most advanced sensors. Initial estimates suggest they'll reach outer Council systems within 50 standard years. Ambassador, we need to know, could these be human constructs? The irony was not lost on Zexhai. The Council had finally detected the same threats that humans have been tracking for years, and their first assumption was that humanity was responsible. Counselor, based on my observations, I don't believe humans have the technological capability to construct anything on that scale. However, they're already aware of these structures and have been monitoring them. Veltar's 4 eyes focused intensely on her. They knew? How long have they known? According to Commander Chun, human deep space monitoring has been tracking these structures for several years. They estimate the arrival timeline at 50 local years, which correlates closely with your own projections. There was a long pause as Veltar processed this information. Ambassador, this changes everything. If humans have been aware of external threats that our own monitoring systems only just detected, their technological capabilities are far more advanced than we realized. It's more complex than that, Counselor. Human technology isn't necessarily superior to ours, but it appears to be focused very differently. They've prioritized long-range detection and defensive preparation over faster-than-light travel or energy manipulation. Why would a species make such unusual technological choices? Zexhai activated her own display, showing Veltar the comprehensive intelligence analysis humans had compiled on Council activities. Because they've been studying us, Counselor. For 8 years, humanity has been conducting intelligence gathering on an unprecedented scale. They know about the aggression filter. They know about species that have vanished from Council records. They've been preparing for the possibility that we might view them as a threat. Veltar's throat sac deflated completely, a sign of extreme shock in Corvin physiology. They know about classified Council policies. They've reverse-engineered our xenopolitical doctrines from fragmentary communications, intercepts, and pattern analysis. Counselor, their analytical capabilities are extraordinary. The holographic connection wavered as Veltar apparently moved to access additional information. When his image stabilized, his expression had changed to something Zexhai had never seen before: genuine fear. Ambassador, I'm uploading additional classified data to your station. What I'm about to show you is known only to the Inner Council, but current circumstances require full disclosure. New files flooded Zexhai's systems, and as she reviewed them, she felt her worldview crumble completely. The classified records contained detailed accounts of 15 species that had been forcibly relocated or eliminated by Council forces over the past 10,000 years. Every single one had been classified as aggressively expansionist and deemed incompatible with galactic peace. But more disturbing were the records of Council first contact protocols. Every species was evaluated according to a strict set of criteria, and those that failed to meet the standards were either guided toward appropriate development or prevented from achieving interstellar capability. Counselor, she managed, these records suggest that the Council has been actively suppressing or eliminating species that don't conform to approved behavioral patterns. The galaxy is a dangerous place, Ambassador. The peace and stability we enjoy today require difficult decisions. Species that insist on maintaining aggressive tendencies eventually threaten everyone else. But what if we've been wrong? What if aggression and cooperation aren't mutually exclusive? Veltar's image leaned closer. Explain. Zexhai activated her analysis of human behavior patterns. Humans have somehow managed to maintain their competitive and aggressive drives while also developing unprecedented levels of international cooperation. They're not becoming pacifists, but they're learning to direct their aggression constructively. That's impossible. Every xenopsychological model confirms that aggressive species either destroy themselves or must be forced to change. Every model based on species that have already been processed through the aggression filter. Counselor, we've never actually observed what happens when an aggressive species is allowed to develop naturally without external intervention. The silence that followed was pregnant with implications. Finally, Veltar spoke, and his voice carried harmonics that Zexhai recognized as profound uncertainty. Ambassador, are you suggesting that our fundamental approach to maintaining galactic peace has been incorrect? I'm suggesting that we may have been preventing the development of exactly the kind of species we need to face external threats. Before Veltar could respond, new alarms sounded throughout Zexhai's station. Her tactical displays lit up with proximity warnings, and she found herself looking at something that should have been impossible. A massive human fleet was approaching her position, dozens of ships of various sizes, all clearly military in nature. But they weren't approaching in an attack formation. Instead, they were maintaining a respectful distance while transmitting what appeared to be diplomatic protocols. Counselor, I'm going to have to continue this conversation later. I'm receiving a priority communication from Commander Chen. Chen's image appeared on a secondary display, and her expression was grim. Ambassador, I apologize for the dramatic appearance, but we have a situation that requires immediate attention. Commander, what's happening? Our deep space monitoring has detected significant changes in those unknown structures we discussed. They've altered course and accelerated. Our revised estimates put them at the outer council systems in 15 years, not 50. Zexhai felt her internal temperature drop several degrees. 15 years. And there's more. We've finally managed to get detailed sensor readings on one of the smaller structures. Ambassador, these aren't ships or space stations. There's something else entirely. Chen activated her own display, and Zexhai found herself looking at sensor data that defied comprehension. The structures appear to be partially organic, partially technological, and completely alien to any known form of construction. What are they? We don't know, but we've detected energy signatures that suggest they're actively consuming matter and converting it into additional structures. They appear to be self-replicating. Veltar's hologram flickered as he attempted to process this information. Self-replicating structures? That's a potential extinction threat to every form of life in this galactic arm, Chen finished. Ambassador, Counselor, we need to talk. All of us. Together. The implications hit Zexhai like a physical blow. The galaxy was facing a threat that could potentially destroy every civilized world, and the only species that had been preparing for such a possibility was the one the Council had been considering eliminating. Commander Chun, what are you proposing? A joint conference. Human leadership, Council representatives, and anyone else who might be able to contribute to a defense strategy. We have 15 years to figure out how to survive something that appears designed to consume entire civilizations. Veltar's throat sac was cycling through rapid inflation and deflation, a sign of extreme agitation. The Council cannot officially recognize human authority to call such a conference. Then, don't make it official, Chen interrupted. Make it a survival strategy session. Because, Counselor, with all due respect, your pacifist species are going to need help from someone who still remembers how to fight. The brutal honesty of the statement should have been offensive, but instead, Zexhai found it refreshing. For the first time in the crisis, someone was speaking directly about the real problem. Counselor, she interjected, I recommend that we accept Commander Chen's proposal. The classified files you just shared confirm that the Council has been eliminating species with military potential for millennia. If we're facing a genuine external threat, we may need exactly the capabilities we've been suppressing. Veltar was quiet for a long moment, his four eyes cycling through different focus patterns as he considered the situation. Finally, he spoke, and his voice carried resigned acceptance. Very well. But this conference will be unofficial and classified at the highest levels. And, Ambassador, I want your complete assessment of human capabilities and intentions before we proceed. You'll have it within 6 hours. As the communications ended, Zexhai found herself staring out at the human fleet, maintaining its respectful but obviously powerful presence around her station. She had been sent to determine whether humanity posed a threat to galactic civilization. Instead, she had discovered that galactic civilization might need humanity's help to survive. The irony was profound. The Council had spent millennia eliminating species that might threaten galactic peace, and now they were facing a threat that could only be countered by exactly the kind of species they had been destroying. Commander Chen's voice came through the communications array again. Ambassador, there's one more thing you should know. Yes, we've been in contact with remnants of some of those species that vanished from Council records. Turns out, a few of them managed to escape Council space before they were eliminated. They've been building a defensive alliance in the Outer Rim. Zexhai's world shifted again. How many species? 7 confirmed, possibly more. They call themselves the Free Colonies, and they've been preparing for exactly this kind of external threat for centuries. Ambassador, we're not just offering you a partnership between humans and the Council. We're offering you a chance to join a much larger alliance. As Zexhai prepared her report for the Council, she realized that everything was about to change. The careful balance that had maintained galactic peace for millennia was about to be tested by forces that cared nothing for diplomacy or negotiation. And humanity, the species she had been sent to evaluate for elimination, might be the galaxy's only hope for survival. 6 months after the emergency conference that had changed the course of galactic history, HFY stood on the command deck of the Joint Defense Station Unity 1, watching the largest military fleet in recorded history prepare for humanity's most ambitious operation yet. The station itself was a testament to what could be accomplished when species stopped trying to eliminate each other and started working together. Built in record time using a combination of council engineering, human innovation, and Free Colony's military doctrine, Unity 1 represented technologies that none of the participating species could have developed alone. Ambassador, Commander Chen approached, her uniform now bearing insignia from 3 different governments. Her promotion to Supreme Commander of Joint Defense Forces had been controversial in some council circles, but even the most conservative council members had to admit that no one else had both the military experience and diplomatic skills necessary for the position. Supreme Commander, HFY replied, still adjusting to the human custom of military titles. Are we ready to proceed? As ready as we can be for something that's never been attempted before. The Deep Strike Force is assembled and equipped with the new quantum disruptor weapons. If our analysis is correct, these should be effective against the self-replicating technology of the approaching structures. HFY studied the tactical display showing the assembled fleet. Ships from 18 different species flew in formation, their various technologies integrated through breakthrough advances in universal compatibility protocols that human engineers had developed in partnership with council scientists. The free colonies had contributed their centuries of military experience, while species like the Altarians had provided breakthrough developments in energy shielding. Any word from the reconnaissance mission? Chen's expression became more serious. Captain Velnox transmitted his final report 3 hours ago. The lead structure is even larger than our estimate suggested, roughly the size of Earth's moon. But the good news is that our weapons appear to be effective against the smaller constructs. The reconnaissance mission had been another breakthrough in interspecies cooperation. A volunteer crew of council, human, and Free Colonies personnel had undertaken the dangerous task of approaching the unknown structures close enough to test weapons' effectiveness. Half the crew had been killed in the process, but their sacrifice had provided crucial intelligence. What about the civilian evacuations? Ahead of schedule, the Joint Fleet has successfully relocated populations from 47 worlds in the projected path of the structures. I have to admit, Ambassador, Council logistics capabilities are remarkable when they're applied to something other than forced relocations. The bitter irony wasn't lost on either of them. The same organizational skills that the Council had used to eliminate problematic species were now being used to save entire populations from extinction. High Counselor Voltar approached their position, his massive form accompanied by an entourage that would have been unthinkable a year ago. Free Colonies military advisors, human scientists, and council diplomats working as a unified team. Supreme Commander, Ambassador, he rumbled in greeting. The Council has approved the final phase of the operation. All fleet commanders have been given authorization to proceed with the deep strike. Thank you, Counselor. Though I still think this will be more effective with a unified command structure. Veltar's throat sac inflated slightly. What HFY now recognized as his equivalent of a diplomatic smile. Human efficiency is remarkable, but council bureaucracy exists for good reasons. This compromise ensures that all species maintain their sovereignty while contributing to the common defense. It had taken months of negotiation to reach their current command structure. Humans prefer direct, unified leadership. The council required consensus building and shared authority. The free colonies demanded autonomy for their forces. Somehow, they had managed to create a system that satisfied everyone while remaining functional. Supreme Commander, a human technician approached Chun with obvious urgency. We're receiving a transmission from the Deep Strike Force. Captain Rodriguez requests immediate conference with command staff. Chun activated the main communications array, and Captain Maria Rodriguez's image appeared on the central display. The human officer looked exhausted but excited. Command, we've made contact with the structures, and you're not going to believe what we found. Report, Captain. The structures aren't weapons, Command. They're not even hostile in the conventional sense. They are refugees. The silence on Unity 1's command deck was absolute. Finally, Chen managed to speak. Refugees from what? Something that consumed their home galaxy approximately 50,000 years ago. These structures are the survivors of an entire galactic civilization that was destroyed by something they call the Devourers. Rodriguez activated her own displays, and the command staff found themselves looking at detailed scans of the massive structures. What had appeared to be threatening alien technology was revealed to be something else entirely. Massive ARC ships carrying the survivors of billions of different species. They've been traveling through empty space for millennia, looking for a galaxy that might be able to help them rebuild their civilization. The self-replication technology isn't for conquest, it's for construction. They've been preparing to ask for permission to settle in empty systems. Zexai felt her worldview shift once again. They're not invaders. No, ambassador. They're asking for asylum. Veltar's 4 eyes focused on the display with intense concentration. Captain, you said they were fleeing something called the Devourers. Are these entities still a threat? Rodriguez's expression became grim. Yes, Counselor. According to the refugee fleet, the Devourers consume all forms of organized matter and energy. They've already destroyed 2 galaxies, and their advanced scouts are expected to reach this galactic arm within 500 standard years. The implications hit everyone simultaneously. The galaxy wasn't facing a threat from the approaching structures. It was facing a threat so massive that the structures represented their only hope of survival. Supreme Commander, another voice joined the communication, this one clearly non-human and speaking in heavily accented council standard. I am Fleet Coordinator Zexneen of the Survivor Alliance. We request permission to approach Unity 1 for diplomatic contact. Chen looked at Veltar, who nodded slowly. Permission granted, Fleet Coordinator. We welcome the opportunity for peaceful contact. As the communication ended, the command staff found themselves dealing with a situation that none of their preparations had anticipated. Instead of preparing for war, they were now preparing for the largest refugee resettlement operation in galactic history. This changes everything, Veltar observed. Yes, but it also explains a great deal, Zexai replied. The Survivor Alliance has been fleeing the Devourers for 50,000 years. They've had to become experts at survival, cooperation between different species, and defensive warfare. They're exactly what we need to prepare for what's coming. Chen was already pulling up resource allocation displays. We can accommodate their immediate needs, but settling refugees from multiple galaxies is going to require unprecedented cooperation. The Council's infrastructure, human organizational capabilities, and Free Colony's military expertise will need everything working together. Over the following weeks, Unity 1 became the center of the largest diplomatic and logistical operation in recorded history. The Survivor Alliance brought with them technologies and knowledge accumulated across multiple galaxies, but they also brought warnings about the true scope of the threat facing all organized life. The Devourers, according to the survivors, represented entropy made manifest, a force that consumed not just matter and energy, but the very possibility of organization and complexity. They had destroyed civilizations that spanned entire galaxies, and they were systematically working their way through the universe. But the survivors also brought hope. In their 50,000 years of flight, they had developed technologies and strategies that could potentially slow or even stop the Devourers. More importantly, they had learned that the key to survival wasn't military might alone, but the ability to coordinate the efforts of countless different species toward a common goal. Ambassador, Chun found Zexai in Unity 1's observation deck a month after first contact with the Survivor Alliance. I wanted to thank you. Thank me? For what? For not recommending that the Council eliminate humanity when you had the chance. Zexai's crystalline structure generated a pattern of bioluminescence that humans had learned to recognize as laughter. Supreme Commander, I think we can both agree that my original mission was based on fundamentally flawed assumptions. Maybe, but you were willing to question those assumptions when the evidence demanded it. That's not something every diplomat would have done. They stood together watching the massive construction projects taking place around Unity 1. Human engineering crews worked alongside Council technicians and Free Colony's military specialists, building defensive installations using Survivor Alliance technology. Ships from dozens of different species moved in coordinated patterns, their crews learning to work together despite vast differences in biology and culture. Supreme Commander, do you think we can actually succeed? Can we build a defense against something that has destroyed multiple galaxies? Shin was quiet for a moment, watching a human engineer explain a technical concept to a group of Survivor Alliance refugees using a combination of mathematics, gestures, and what appeared to be interpretive dance. Ambassador, a year ago I would have said it was impossible. But a year ago, I also would have said it was impossible for the Council to work with the free colonies, or for 18 different species to coordinate a military operation, or for refugees from destroyed galaxies to share their most advanced technologies with people they just met. And now I think the Devourers may have made a mistake. They've been consuming galaxies full of species that were isolated from each other, competing for resources, and focused on their individual survival. But we're building something different here. We're building an alliance that spans multiple galaxies, combines the strengths of hundreds of different species, and is unified by a common purpose. Zexhai considered this. You think cooperation might be more powerful than consumption? I think the Devourers are about to find out what happens when they try to consume a galaxy that's ready for them. As they watch the continued construction of humanity's greatest project, a galactic alliance dedicated to the survival of all organized life, Zexhai reflected on how completely her understanding of the universe had changed. She had been sent to assess whether humanity was too dangerous to be allowed to develop. Instead, she had discovered that humanity's unique combination of aggression and cooperation might be exactly what the galaxy needed to survive its greatest challenge. The Devourers were coming, but for the first time in 50,000 years, they would encounter a galaxy that was united, prepared, and determined to fight for the right of all species to exist and grow. And at the heart of that defense would be a species that had learned the most important lesson in the universe, that the greatest strength comes not from the ability to destroy, but from the willingness to protect what matters most. The galaxy had finally found its guardians, and they were exactly the species that the Council had once considered too dangerous to survive.